Elara pried open the lid of the mahogany chest. The wood groaned, shedding flakes of decay onto the archive floor. Inside, buried beneath layers of dust, lay a single sheet of parchment. It was brittle, stained a deep, rusted brown, yet the ink remained sharp. She traced the lines. It was a 16th-century lullaby, a dense web of polyphonic notation that seemed to pulse under her fingertips. She took the score to the hospice ward. The room smelled of antiseptic and stale air. Beside the window, a veteran sat in his chair, his hands locked in a violent, rhythmic tremor that had persisted for weeks. Elara smoothed the parchment against her palm. She cleared her throat, took a breath, and began to hum. The first few bars hung in the stagnant air, thin and melodic. The veteran shifted. His shoulders dropped. The shaking in his hands slowed, then flickered, and finally ceased. He turned his head toward her. His gaze sharpened, clearing of the usual fog. For the first time in years, the corners of his mouth pulled upward into a genuine smile. Elara stood frozen, the lullaby still vibrating in her chest, convinced she had stumbled upon a miracle. By the next morning, the ward had transformed. Patients who had not spoken in years were sitting upright, reciting poetry and calling out names of people long gone. Elara moved from room to room, her heart racing with the weight of what she had unlocked. She was a conduit for a lost, restorative grace. But the shift came at noon. A night shift nurse sprinted into the hallway, her face white, pointing toward the end of the corridor. Elara followed, her footsteps echoing against the linoleum. Inside the room, a man stood before the vanity mirror. He was staring at the glass, his hands pressed flat against the surface, his fingers splayed. He was not looking at himself, he was looking through himself. The glass showed the empty bed behind him and the wall beyond, but no silhouette, no face, no movement. He turned to Elara, his eyes wide, his mouth working silently. He looked down at his own hands, then back to the mirror, and let out a jagged, hollow sound. He touched the glass again, his fingers passing through the surface as if it were nothing more than cold, stagnant air. He had forgotten his own image. He had lost the anchor of his own existence. Elara retreated to the small practice room, the parchment trembling in her grip. She sat at the piano, the keys cold and unresponsive under her touch. She struck the first chord, then the second, slowing the tempo to a crawl. She pulled the intervals apart, listening for the architecture of the melody. It was there. Beneath the delicate polyphony, a texture emerged. It was a low, wet, rasping sound, like air being forced through a throat choked with silt. She played the sequence again, harder this time. The rasp grew louder, vibrating against the keys, a jagged frequency that seemed to vibrate in her own marrow. This was not a lullaby of restoration. It was a surgical tool designed to loosen the soul from muscle and bone. A cold realization settled in her gut. She stood up so abruptly the stool clattered against the floor. Bolted through the double doors and sprinted down the hallway. Her heart hammered against her ribs.